Hi everyone, this is Melody Rondeau and I'm going to be walking us through our lesson on solving by factoring. So I know that we just did a whole bunch of kinds of factoring, and so this lesson is kind of the bridge to the next unit where we're going to talk about solving quadratic equations. So to get started, again, our lesson solving by factoring. Our learning intention, I'm learning how to solve quadratic equations. And the success criteria, I can solve quadratic equations by factoring. So first of all, what the heck are we talking about when we say quadratics or quadratic equation? So this is what a quadratic equation looks like. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So this is what we call standard form. And the a, the b, and the c are actually not variables. They just are placeholders for actually numbers. So normally we would have the x's would be variables, but we would have numbers in those places for a, b, and c. So that's a quadratic equation. Then solutions for a quadratic equation are called, and there are multiple names here that we're going to try to start to learn here and use interchangeably. So we have roots. Sometimes we call them zeros, x-intercepts, and then, of course, solutions. So the four right there, we have solutions. Let me get my pen going here. So we have this word right here, different words for the answer to a quadratic equation, or the solution, or the roots, or the zeros, or the x-intercepts. And we'll talk about each one a little bit more when we are using it in that context. For now, we're mostly going to talk about roots and zeros, more zeros maybe. X-intercepts we'll talk a little bit more about when we're graphing. All right, so the zero product property is something that we are going to use with our skills in factoring to be able to solve these fabulous equations. So the first thing is I want you to think about what I could fill in these blanks. So we have blank times, that dot means times, equals 0. What could I fill in those blanks with and have the answer be 0? So basically, what times what equals 0? So some ideas, I might say 1 times 0 equals 0. And I'm sure you guys can come up with lots of others. Of course, 37 times 0 is 0. Or I could do 0 times -5 and I get 0. Lots of different options. So kind of the idea here is, in order for the answer to be 0, one of the numbers we multiply, it has to be 0. So to fill in the blank here, I would say 0 times any number is going to equal 0. So the zero product property says, hey, if I know the answer is 0 and I'm multiplying, then one of the things has to be 0. So we see it right here. If a times b is 0, then either a is 0 or b is 0. So one of them has to be 0. And again, we call this the zero product property, and we're going to see how to use it here in just a second. All right, so this first one, the directions here, find the zeros, which is a way of saying find the answer or the solution to these fabulous equations. So we're going to start with number 1, and I'm going to be using some colors here. I'm going to be using red and green, so I'm going to start with red. But before I do anything, I want to point out that we have equals 0. And we happen to have two things that are multiplied. So one of the things that we are multiplying is this whole parenthesis. Wow, that was terrible. Let me try that one more time. So this parenthesis right here, the x plus 4, is one of the things that's being multiplied. I might call it my a. And then we have my b, which I'm going to switch over to green here. And so this one is what I would call my b. And so if we go back to what we were doing just a minute ago, talking about zero product property, I'm multiplying a times b and the answer is 0. So I know either a is 0 or b is 0. So because we don't know which one it is, we don't know if the first parenthesis is somehow equal to 0 or the second one is 0. So we got to set each part each parenthesis equal to 0 because we don't know which one is the 0, and we want to make sure we have all the possibilities for x. So for the first one, when I go to solve that, I'm going to take the x plus 4 equals 0, and I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides, and I get x equals -4. And then I'm going to solve the second equation here, and I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and I get x equals 2. So the two possible values, x could equal a -4, or x could equal 2. So we're going to start to write our answers together. So these are all the possible answers for x are -4 and 2. And you'll see I usually put them in number order from smallest to biggest, but you don't have to. You just need to list them. All right, let's try example 2. This one, so that one I didn't actually have to do any factoring. I was just practicing using the 0 product property for example 1. On example 2, though, we're going to have to do some factoring because I need it to say that I have two things being multiplied. So in this case, I have two things being subtracted. So I'm going to use my factoring skills, and we hopefully remember the first thing I do every single time I factor is I look for a GCF. And in this case, the GCF is 2x. So that GCF is 2x. And then where do I write it? Oh yeah, in front of parentheses. All right, and then I go ahead and divide. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. X squared divided by x gives me x. And then 14x divided by 2x, -14 divided by 2, I get negative or -7, and the x's cancel, and I have equals 0. But this gives me, because of the way factoring works, this gives me two things that are multiplied. My first thing here is the 2x. This would be like my a. And then the second thing here is my parenthesis. The second part here, 3x minus 7. So this is like my b. So here are my two things that are multiplied that are equaling 0. So if they, sorry, I've got to get a 0 in there. All right, so if I have two things that are multiplied to equal 0, I know that one of the things has to be 0. So I'm going to say 2x equals 0 and 3x minus 7 equals 0. So those are my two parts. All right, now I'll solve them with just my regular writing utensil. So here, to get x by itself, I would divide both sides by 0, and I get x equals 0 divided by 2 is 0. For the green equation, the second one here, I would add 7 to both sides, and that would give me 3x equals 7. And then divide both sides by 3, and I get a yucky fraction. I can't divide 7 by 3 evenly, so I'm going to just leave it as this improper fraction. But remember, we're going to group our answers together, so I'm going to say 0, 7 over 3. That's the list of possible answers for x. All right, let's see if we can do it in a slightly more complicated problem. Here we go. Example 3, we're going to solve by factoring. So this one even tells us to use our factoring skills. So the first thing we do every single time we factor is we are looking for a GCF. So as I look across, I see all of these are divisible by, looks like 2. So let's divide them all by 2. And where do I write the greatest common factor? Oh yes, in front of parentheses. So 2 in front of parentheses divided out, I get x squared. Then I have, oh, I'm actually give myself a little bit of more room here because of the other factoring I'm going to want to do. So sorry, just give myself a little bit more room. Here we go. There we go. So 2 in front of parentheses. All right, x squared. 16x divided by 2. 16 divided by 2 is 8, and then the x. And then 30 divided by 2 is 15. And then I have equals 0. And at this point, we did our GCF. It was 2. But we're going to continue to look for ways to factor with a trinomial. This is the unit we just did. Lots of factoring. I'm going to use the x, and I'm going to draw it a little bit better. Goodness sake. I didn't mean to do all that. All right, so here we go. X and x. Okay, so remember we take the number in front and the number in back and multiply them. So this would be 15x squared. That's my multiply to make number, and we're adding to make 8. So 15, multiply to make 15, add to make 8. I believe the numbers that do that are 5 and 3. And you could at that point do grouping or the box, but I happen to notice that there is a 1 in front of my x squared, which means I can go straight to parentheses. And I use my special numbers here, the 5 and the 3. And I would say x plus 5 and x plus 3. Remember, that's the shortcut that we talked about before. And then we can only do it if there is a 1 in front. That circle is just terrible. We can only do the shortcut if there's a 1 in front of our x squared. Okay, so we can get that circle a little better. All right, don't forget the 2 still is in front, and then we have equals 0. So this one, we have a lot of multiplication happening. We have 2 times parentheses times parentheses. The concept is still the same though. If all these are multiplied together and the answer is 0, I know for sure one of them has to be 0. So I would go through and make each thing equal to 0. For the first one, it is a little bit weird because I have 2 equals 0, which is just silly because we know 2 is not 0. So in that equation, we know that 2 is not the thing that is the 0. So I'm just saying, hey, guess what? 2 is not 0, which we know. It's got to be one of the parentheses that is equal to 0. So again, I'm going to make each parenthesis equal 0 because I want to know all the options for x. So here I would subtract 5 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 5. And then on this one, subtract 3 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 3. So final answer, x equals negative 5 and negative 3. All right, our last example, here we go. We're going to solve by factoring. Before we jump into that, you may notice something. Hopefully you notice something. This problem looks different than all the other problems we've seen. It does not equal 0. So if we're going to do solving by factoring, we're going to be using that zero product property. They go together. Whoa, sorry. Zero product really doesn't want me to do that. Okay, so there we go, zero product property, just reminding us. So if we're doing the zero product property, it's got to equal 0. So I actually want everything on one side and equal to 0. So here I'm going to actually do the inverse of -2, and I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And this is going to give me the equal 0 that I'm looking for. So I'm going to do x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0. So now I have the equal 0. I'm going to do my first step. Anytime I factor, is there a greatest common factor? No. And because I kind of squished this together here, I'm going to do my x on the side on this one. So I would multiply though the first and the last. So I get 3x squared. That's my multiply to make. My add to make is the middle, so 4x. So I am multiplying to make 3 and adding to make 4. And the only numbers that will do that are a 3 and a 1, because that's the only way to multiply to get 3 is 3 times 1 or 1 times 3. So 3 and 1. And again, because I have the 1 in front, I can go straight to my answer for the factoring part and say x plus 3 and x plus 1. Remember, the 3 and the 1 came from right here in my x, those special numbers. And don't forget that this is, sorry if I can get my pen to agree with me here. All right, this is still equal to 0. And this gives us our two things that are multiplied. So I'm going to say one of them for sure has to be 0. So I make each one equal 0 so I can find all the possible answers for x. And then to solve, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, x equals negative 3. Subtract 1 from both sides, and I get x equals negative 1. So final answer, x equals negative 3 and negative 1. And that completes our notes. So take a minute, check that success criteria. I can solve quadratic equations by factoring. If you've got it, check it off. Otherwise, circle it, and you guys can get started on your practice. We'll see you later.